Good morning, good morning, good morning. It's Dr. Sasheen talking to you this Monday morning about toxicity and toxic patterns of behavior. Man, listen, there are so many ways that we see toxic ways of relating playing out in real time in interpersonal relationships, right? Between friends, between lovers, between spouses, between mates, between strangers. For those of you who didn't see the news over the weekend about the young woman in Harlem, New York, who was attacked for simply saying no to the offer of someone to buy her a bottle of wine, that kind of aggressive predatory behavior stems from toxic belief in relationship dynamics that is just permeates so much of the way that we teach relationships and how we teach interactions amongst people. There are very few women in the world who can say that they have not been subjected to unwanted advances from someone of the either opposite sex or same sex, but mostly the opposite sex. And the fact of the matter is that the toxicity that we see play out on the streets of places like Harlem, New York, or any other place where women are attacked for just simply standing in their um, agency by wanting to just have their own space. That stems from this understanding that is bred into us as young children that women are inherently not supposed to be able to say no to any kind of relationship. And this is something I want to talk about briefly in our Monday morning our Monday morning conversation, which has grown from 2 minutes to four, but I'm working on it. Timing not always my thing. And that is the reality of toxic relationships spreads throughout communities and infests communities, and you can see it play out in the news, but you also see it play out in the home, where children are not allowed to say no to adults of any nature, and little girls especially are not allowed to say no. You see it in cases where little boys are not allowed the agency to feel anything other than aggression and a sense of ownership over other people, and that kind of agency also not good. And so, as you're thinking about your relationships, and as the scope of the world brings more and more of these instances into our face with the 24/7 news cycle, the thing that we have to wrestle with is that the incidents that happen to women on the streets aren't happening in a vacuum. They're happening with people watching. They're happening with friends on standing by. They're happening in classrooms where professors refuse to teach anything other than a specific way of looking at the world. They're happening in relationships where women, young, old, middle, are still being taught patterns of behavior that are designed to subjugate and to submit to any kind of authority, as long as the authority is within the confines of a interpersonal relationship. And that dysfunction just gets passed down from generation to generation. And last week I talked about the cycles of abuse and trauma that happen that are getting passed along to our children. This is one of those cycles. Toxic relationships is another cycle that we pass along. It's a cycle that we teach over and over again through our words, our deeds, our behavior. We see it on the news, we read it in books. I have to say, one of my favorite shows of all time, used to be one of my favorite shows of all time, was Girlfriends, and that's kind of the equivalent for Sex and the City for those of you who may not have watched it. But as I watch those things as an adult, I cringe at some of the levels of toxicity that are played out. But that is not new in television dramas, right? There are so many of them that are feeding the idea that a toxic relationship is better than no relationship at all. And that is, in fact, why we have so many bad relationships that never end in divorce, that never go their separate ways, and that ultimately end up with two people just being horrendously unhappy most of the time. Because instead of teaching that you have a right to be whole, happy, and healthy in yourself and in your relationships, what we find is that you have the right to be in a relationship, and if you can figure out how to be whole, happy, and healthy, that's great, but that's not as important as the relationship that you're in. And because of that, we will never stop the cycle of marriage and divorce. And not only that, we will never break the cycles of childhood trauma that end up being toxic to our adult relationships. That's some food for thought on this Monday morning.